that the um, that Harari says that our communication networks are really much more interested in information than truth.
Mm.
And being and just pursuing information doesn't necessarily, and in some cases, it thwarts the pursuit of truth. And so that becomes a real interesting conflict. To me, this is one of the most direct ties to media literacy, which is the overwhelming amount of information that we're blasted in the face with like a fire hose every day that always gets in the way of us actually ever getting into the conversation about, well, what's the truth all this. So that's one of the central ideas that Harari is working with is like, and as we all know, when you start looking closely at some of the communication media that we work with, they're not interested in communicating truth. They're interested in your not stopping looking, right? Because that information economy thing is what they're based on. And of course, most people who are consuming these things aren't very conscious of that, which is why us media literacy people are some of the most important people in the world for getting people to start thinking about this. So anyway, so that's just kind of this relationship between information and truth, I think, is at the center of it. And of course, what Harari does is use history to think about that. So,
Whoa, whoa. Can I ask a question? Then another. Or well, let's hear other responses to that question about why is it important? Why is it important?
Can
Ralph,
I?
you start with the economic part of it.
He also, I mean, he talks about the function of communication being to connect people, and as opposed to truth. And one of the things I thought was interesting to me, which was new to me, was the idea of intersubjectivities. So he talked about subjective reality and objective reality. And he talks about things like religion and money and these things that are really created, our own ideas that don't emerge from nature or anything. Wholly, and that those are the things that people typically connect on, or those intersubjective stories. So that was super interesting to me.
Mm. Hey Wes, welcome. I'm glad you're here. We've introduced ourselves. We've watched the short video. We're thinking about how the history of communication is a more important than ever now topic. And now I'm passing the microphone, sending it back to you, my friend. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Renee. The perils of teaching middle school and trying to Zoom overload. So I sure appreciate
I get it.
yeah.
Um, so Ralph, have you given a little bit of an overview of some of your
Yeah.
perspectives? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just mentioning about the information truth relationship. And since somebody was just talking about intersubjective realities, one of the other dimensions that he talks about quite a bit is the relationship between those intersubjective mythic constructions versus the notion of order. And basically contrasting all of our storytelling activity with all of our documenting activity, with our bureaucracies, right, which are the things that offer the potential of order. And so one of the other things, in addition to this tension between information and truth, is this tension between story fabrication and order. And what sorts of stories create order, what sorts of stories disrupt order, and how have those things worked historically. So that's just another dimension that he talks about. There's a couple of others that I can mention later, but I am interested in what others of you think about the importance of using history as a way of understanding how to make sense out of where we are, and particularly as it all points toward what AI is promising slash threatening all at the same time.
I'd like to jump in here. A good question, Ralph. I'm a former social studies teacher for 12 and a half years in Texas, New York, and Iowa. And now recently, after 40 years at UGA, teaching professional development courses, I've always thought that history of whatever we were talking about was basic. Not everyone is interested in that, however. And so one way that I found to interest people in going back and looking at their past was to actually have them write about the past as if they were living then. And of course, those that have nothing to say have convinced themselves that they need to maybe learn a little bit about the past. But I'm most interested, I've not finished Nexus, but I'm to the point where I can see that the excitement that is put upon us when we can't escape more information and more information every day. And I think the author makes a good point in that eventually the system breaks down when you don't have any time to stop and reflect. So that's what I value about meetings like this, where I can be part of it, but also realize other people may be having those same sorts of tensions.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
Scott just mentioned actually something that is, I think, a really important. Scott, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. He
It's a
talks.
great story. It's part of actually after you watch a few of Harari's interviews, it's part of his roadshow is to talk about Hammer of the Witches. So
So yeah, Hammer of the Witches. One of the things he says about Hammer of the Witches was a popular book about witches, and I don't know if it spurred or it enhanced the validity of witch hunting. Uh, Starting, I forget what year it was, Ralph, but I like this quote where he says it seems so relevant today. Is that yeah, the Hammer of the Witches sold a lot more than Copernicus's these important scientific discoveries, and I think that's true today. People are much more interested in lurid tales and these crazy things as opposed to scientists discover and more academic things. Um, but he says that while kind of getting back to the medium and the message bit, that while the printing press did not necessarily spur the witch hunts, it certainly helped spread it and add validity to it. Them.
yeah, there's part of what he's doing in that section I think is really interesting is he's talking about this notion that we all have that Gutenberg came along and all of a sudden the ability to reproduce scientific documents and that spurred on the scientific revolution. And essentially what he's kind of suggesting is that what you were just saying, Scott, that it actually promoted this myth, if you want to again contrast, kind of myth and its grounding in religion of a global conspiracy of witches that were both male and female initially. Eventually, it becomes, of course, a very gendered practice to go slaughter as many, local independently thinking women as you can find who first must be tortured into confessing. And then, so it's very lurid. It's very, it kind of aligns with people's Christianity of the time of the 15th and 16th centuries. Really widespread, which is what, Harari says that basically the technology of the printing press just allowed for the mass duplication. And he quite rightly parallels this to QAnon, right? The idea that there is an anonymous communicator who is communicating mystical ideas that are causing people to interpret them in particular ways and then take actions that lead up to things like, marching on a Congress, right, in January 6th. So he's talking about these as sort of like older communication systems. Eventually, and I'm shut me up from going on too long. Eventually, what he talks about is that the scientific revolution, what that does, and the reason that when it comes along, even though they're not as widely reproduced, they're not as widely distributed, but they're more historically significant, is because built into the scientific process are self-correcting mechanisms. And you don't find in the witch's hammer, something you don't find in most religious practices, is any kind of mechanism that will interrogate what's being thought and perpetuated, and be able to correct for errors, which, he essentially is arguing that's critical to the, success, much more so in democratic situations rather than totalitarian situations, because those correcting mechanisms are distributed in different parts of the process. Scientific process is inherently part of it because scientific success is measured by your ability to find errors in other people's work and then publish corrections. So, yeah, Wes.
To your question about using history to study our present moment, I think it is actually a bit of a deft approach in schools with contentious current conspiracies to do this. I've been doing this for a number of years, looking at the Apollo moon landings and the, YouTubers who were claiming that, Apollo was all faked and the world is flat and these other things. And so I've been doing that with middle schoolers. I think it is so important to know our history, and there's so much that I don't know. I dropped a link into Stephen Johnson's book, Extra Life, A Short History of Living Longer. And that book to me, reminds us about double-blind surveys and vaccines and science. I mean, we need to be defenders of science and the scientific process. And knowing our history and studying our history is so important. And Harari really uncovers a lot of chapters. He's such a good storyteller. I've subjected my wife to some of this as we've been listening to it on Audible, but it's good listening because he is such a good storyteller. But I also like how he connects the nihilism and just where QAnon and all of that can go with hopelessness and the myth of really the marketplace of ideas. I just listened to this again. It referenced because believe me, I'm not citing court cases normally. It's like 1926, Whitney versus California. It was this case where Brandeis was saying, hey, when we just have more information, we get better results and truth is out. So the basic level of defining information and recognizing that information itself is not truth, we can't fully define reality, and that context matters so much. And again, yes, that we can study our history, because this idea that I think I've had before that, oh yeah, the scientific revolution, we can all thank Gutenberg because it just happened. No, it didn't. And I think studying that history is both intrinsically important to know what happened, but it's instrumentally hugely valuable to give us insight into what we're experiencing now, which are trends and changes that are different. And I think AI is different in many ways, but I think there's also a lot of good similarities to pick up on.
Yeah. I'm of course I'm having a blast in the chat thinking about all these cool ideas that you're developing here. And maybe we are hard. I've always worried. The one thing that keeps me up at night about media literacy, like why it might not cure cancer or do any of the good things I've been hoping it might, is because if we are hardwired to be attracted to sex, violence, children, animals, and UFOs, that's the witch trial thing all together, right? If we are biologically programmed to be drawn to that kind of content, even when it's not in our best interest, even when it hurts us to do so, then you're right, Wes. The marketplace of ideas is a theory that's broken. And I worry about that because I can imagine how easily that, if our attention can be hijacked by despots and demagogues, then it's very easy to imagine dissent being silenced, repression, and I mean, we're kind of living it. So I feel like media literacy can't thrive in a context where we don't really believe that people can shift their ways of paying attention. And yet can we?
I mean, a current example that just happened, Germany bans the swastika and has very strong rules against that. I don't know if you all saw the commentators coming back to Vance and our Secretary of State, who have condemned Germany for labeling this far right extreme group as an extremist group because it allowed them to surveil them more. And the German officials, very, smartly said, we've learned from our history that it's important to, take right-wing extremist groups seriously and address them differently. And so, the different ways, and I'm not saying this as I mean, this is so interesting as far as what it means for free speech, but our assumptions, right? Because I think we have assumed, let's let anyone do whatever they want. These tools, the technology tools, now with AI, there's such an authoritarian power that's being given by those. And I think that I would love for us to media literacy ourselves out of all these challenges that we have, but it appears that we need more than that. Bob's got his hand up. Go ahead, Bob.
couldn't find how to raise my hand on the chat. Yeah, I was really drawn to this book. I'm working with a historian actually for a couple of chapters in my book on fear-based thinking. And we're looking at the history of fear-based thinking. And it goes back to ancient times. And we've gone through, a week ago, I went through a list of all of the wars that he could think of. And there wasn't a single one that wasn't a result of fear and fear-based thinking. And the issue is that fear is a short-term response. Renee, you mentioned biologically what happens. Biologically, it's designed to grab our attention and give us a surge of energy to deal with an immediate threat. The problem is when that becomes a habit, when we get a constant message of fear from different directions. Now we're getting it from media during wars. We got it then during the 13th century. They got it from the Black Plague. And so then our mind adapts to fear. And what happens to our mind is we become more self-centered. Our frame shrinks. Okay, we get a colored filter where we don't see things because of the emotion, and our focus becomes fragmented. We don't see the connections and relationships and effects of things that we're doing. So we become more self-centered. We seek control and certainty. We put everything into broad categories, and we miss the details and the nuance and the relationships. We get in this adversarial mindset, which creates all kinds of problems. Our focus becomes narrow and fragmented, and we get a scarcity mindset. And when we can recognize those things are happening, we see, oh my God, I'm in fear-based thinking, we can slow down. We can remember, okay, fear is short-term. We can restore some balance and start asking questions and adopt what we're learning in media literacy to actually sort through all of this. But when we're stuck in fear, our frame is so small is that there's not room for that information to get in.
Can I add something? I think that really is another way of saying what Bob just said, which is typically as media literacy people, we really tend to focus on the analysis of media, and production, of course. But I think as kind of Bob was alluding to, is like we need to focus on ourselves. What is it that we bring to it? And I think that might be a way of actually getting more people interested, because everyone likes to think about themselves, right? So just thinking about, what are my tendencies? What's my background that makes me attracted to this or makes me draws me to this? And I think that might be something to kind of weave in is, yeah, what do I as a media consumer bring to this, and how does that impact how I use it?
If I could, there's a connection, I think, Bob, in what you're talking about, and Scott, you also, that is what Harari talks about as the alignment problem, and he talks about it in the context of the history of war and Clausewitz's ideas of war as politics by other means, right? But what he writes is that the alignment problem, when computers are given a specific goal, such as just going to read a paragraph and then I won't go on too much, but the alignment, when computers are given a specific goal, such as to increase YouTube traffic to 1 billion hours a day, they use all their power and ingenuity to achieve this goal. Since they operate very differently than humans, they are likely to use methods their human overlords didn't anticipate. This can result in dangerous, unforeseen consequences that are not aligned with the original human goals. Even if recommendation algorithms stop encouraging hate, other instances of the alignment problem might result in larger catastrophes than the anti-Rohingya campaign, which is what he uses as a historical example of this kind of alignment problem. The more powerful and independent computers become, the bigger the danger. So it's this alignment between what might be programmed in the short-term goal, and of course, he is concerned about that AI can basically construct its own goals and construct its own means for doing it. One of the most striking things in this was the story. I don't know if you remember, or when you get to it, there's a short story he tells about CAPTCHAs. You all know what right?
Mhm.
And the story he tells is about that they were basically trying to get a computer to learn how to do captures, which are supposed to be a Turing test to determine whether the person looking at it is a machine or a human, and it's supposed to be, something that machines can't recognize. And so they programmed something to go out and see if it could figure it out. And what it eventually did, which is really remarkable, is it actually it used human beings on other parts of the internet to actually solve the capture for them. And to do that, it lied. It had to say to the human, I am not a machine. I have visual problems, so I can't read the capture. Can you help me, please? So it was dishonest, and it found a clever way to solve the problem, right? But it wasn't aligned with the goal, right? The goal wasn't to, create artificial intelligence that's just going to make things up to accomplish the short-term thing, and miss what the long-term goal is. So that's some of the ways, and I think that leads some people to think Harari is, basically very cynical. I don't think he is actually, but I think he is really doing a diagnosis of some things we really need to think about.
So Ralph, do you think that, we're at this hype cycle with AI, we're at like the top of the curve, right? I mean, we're all hoping it's gonna, be the next new thing. Is the idea that, in that empowerment protection kind of thing, that we're now, to burst the bubble of the hype cycle, we now have to pay attention to the unintended negative consequences and make those more widely known? And should that be an explicit aim of media literacy education? Why or why not?
That is a really good question I've been struggling with, because I am cursed with optimism. So I understand. I mean, I think a lot of the initial concerns we had about cheating and, AI taking away people's jobs and everything, that, yeah, it's all part of it too. But that isn't the new part, right? And Harari emphasizes the new part is it's doing things that we can't even reverse engineer to find out how it did them, because they're so intricate and they're so complex. So it's a sealed black box what it's doing. Um, and yeah, so I think, and I think that I don't know where we are on the curve. That's part of the challenge, I think, because I think it's still changing really rapidly. Um, and so but what it really does scream to me, and which is why I'm interested in developing a class on AI literacy for next spring, is we really need to start, and people are already starting to work on this, right? You're starting to see a lot of movement in terms of people talking about what constitutes AI literacy. And all of us face this in the classroom. What do we need to tell our students so that they're in some ways, that they don't sort of stop at the entrance point, either by using it to cheat themselves out of learning how to write, or, you know, um, being too pessimistic about the effect it's going to have on media industries, which is a thing that happens with my students. So I'm interested in what others of you, though, think about, how do you talk about this in classes with students, given the way that they're interacting with AI now.
Samantha, talk to us about your beautiful chat there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I love this book, and yet, or not yet, and it just left us kind of, as a breathless, but lost us definitive response. It's like we have created a monster that is large, we've created, and that needs to be corralled, a year and a half ago. And I had no response to what my group should be doing about it, or even what I should be doing about it. But I certainly got the message of being, feeling like I should have been hit over the head with the urgency. I would love to know what everybody else thinks about how we respond to this terrible sense of urgency and danger.
And that actually links to something, Philip, that you said in the chat about how if a person coming from an engineering background, identifying a problem but not identifying a solution kind of is paralyzing. Can you say more about that? Why is that a critical point? That's such an interesting insight.
Yeah, I think that kind of the analytical side and kind of being an engineer, I know that we all have pieces of that, and what our actual career and workaday life is, how much of it is kind of engineering or science. It's just really kind of tough to be like, I noticed this thing and look at that thing, and it's something that's not going well. where you would get paid to solve a problem or have people actually listening to you with an engineering hat on is to just go out and look for these, kind of whiz bang sandwiches of, here's this thing that's wrong, and I'm so smart, here's a solution. Where my kind of thinking is right now, listening to everybody, kind of speaking about AI, I haven't read the book. But I do know that professors have used Turnitin. There's different things that are, looking at papers for English classes. I just think this would be a horrible time to be trying to read through what somebody has produced, and it's kind of, if the monster has been created, it's kind of like, as it says here in chat, put the monster. What is the monster? Is it a monster? Is it not? I just think it'd be very hard to be teaching, kind of writing at this time. So the engineers are doomed and the writers are doomed.
My students had a blast using AI to create, and most of them walked away going, I thought it was bad for creativity, but now I see it's good for creativity. I thought it was going to de-skill me and cognitively, disable me, but actually I found myself more invested. I had a thought partner that could take my ideas and run with them. They ended up feeling way more optimistic, and I was ambivalent about the fact that my class made them feel more optimistic because I'm struggling with this AI literacy thing. So AI is not magic, it's math, right? We should be teaching that, right? But even the math guys say, we don't know how it works, so it is magic. And so can we teach in good conscience? Can we teach AI is not magic, it's math, when actually the black box and the nature of machine learning means that it's not a math we fully understand? I don't know.
I recently read about this woman won Teacher of the Year award in Wisconsin, and what she did, she was teaching history, and she had her students rewrite history. And I wonder if students could rewrite AI. So do some research, give AI, free reign, and then do some other research and write something and see what comes out. And the students the reports that she got back from them rewriting history were really, they really opened up her mind, she said. It's really amazing.
I'm just curious, following from what Renee was saying, I'm curious how others of you are using AI either in your teaching or in your scholarship or in your day-to-day life. How are you finding it as a tool? Although, again, I should say that one of the things that Harari asserts several times in the book is that if you just think of it as a tool, you're missing the fact that it's an agent. And he wants us to think of it as an agent with agency, which is a different kind of thing from previous technologies. But I'm curious how others of you are finding it useful to in what you're doing.
Two quick things I'm doing in my middle school coding class. We have created hybrid mythological creatures, and so kids spun to pick a terrestrial animal and then a winged or mythological creature, and then they've had to create that in Scratch. They had to draw it with pixel art, and then they had to create it in Scratch in 2 dimensions, and then now in 3 dimensions in Minecraft Education. But in the brainstorming and ideation process, I wanted their Scratch project to really give the backstory of their creature. And it was amazing the kinds of imaginative ideas that we're using Flint AI, which our school licenses. And so that not only created some really interesting backstory ideas, but also some visualizations. But then kids had to take these detailed drawings and go back sort of retro 80s style to a 32 by 32 pixel, image. And so that was really powerful, I think, as a catalyst for imaginative thinking about what this mythological hybrid creature might do. And then in my computer apps media literacy class, we've used an activity in Flint to help with our script writing for the culminating videos that students do. And I have required students this time to not tell it, write my script, but to give it some ideas and then ask for some sentences, and to write some sentences and then ask it to improve that. But I did have a student really on the struggle bus with this last week, and we just got to get these scripts done. And so I showed him, here, let's just copy what you've done. Here, make it better, and it made it pretty good. And he was just amazed. This is a 6th grader. So it's really hard to not to tell them, I don't want you to let this AI do all the thinking and work for you. And that's a struggle for me, is like, how do I do that with constraints to say, don't have it write your whole script, because it can. I want it to help you with your thinking, and I want you to go through that process of, what do you want to say about these concepts, and tell the story of this lesson and unit that we did together. But I'm feeling better about it right now than I did last year, because I just felt like there was more skipped thinking last year, and I had some really great scripts that sounded like they were written by high school or college students. And students did say those words in their videos, but I don't think they wrestled with the ideas and they constructed meaning for themselves the same way that I want them to, the same way that they did before AI was in the picture.
Right.
Donna, can you talk about how it's changing how you read? I thought that was an interesting thought.
Yeah, I was just writing back to Renee in the chat that I agree. When they do the summaries, I really appreciate those. But I find that as a reader now, I check almost, if I'm going to use that information, I check almost every link they provide. Because if I don't, I keep thinking to myself, I'm actually not a good researcher anymore, and that I'm taking somebody, AI, a bot, whatever, I'm taking their work, their inability to reason as of yet, and acting as if it's truth, quote, and then trying to convince other people to act on it. So as a reader, it's making me more self-conscious now of my responsibility. AI is making me more responsibility of my both my ability and my willingness to take time as a reader to check all this stuff out. That makes sense.
Yeah. And that raises the question, is why does it seem so trustworthy? Right? Why are we tempted to skip that process?
That's true. Yeah.
Because our brains are easily tricked.
Just like clicking the first link on Google, as people do. It's like,
We get
the computer,
tricked.
it's smart.
The Turing test is insufficient.
Yeah.
So
But
type 1 thinking, the natural fast processing that we do is our curse, right? So media literacy is doomed. If we're going to try to disrupt, if we're going to try to say, oh yeah, type 1 thinking, that's dangerous, you better slow down. How the hell are we going to undo 50,000, 500,000 years of human evolution in a generation?
You have to encourage people to act human, which is to not just be instinctual, but to choose at times things that may go against your just intuition or what brings you immediate pleasure or whatever, which is hard. It's very hard. And values play into that too, because just having all the information out there doesn't necessarily make someone aspirationally want to support human rights and representative democracy. People want to do all kinds of things. And I think that's a real big challenge, because I think it's easier to be a media literacy educator with the marketplace of ideas concept than it is thinking about some of these other issues.
Well, it can loop back to the sort of like, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings or anything, but the ideological argument that's being made, right, where people are saying Renee, going back to the DEI thing, right? I mean, this is an attempt to try to stop what they think of as being a particular kind of indoctrination. And of course, in the state of Oklahoma, what they're trying to replace that with is they actually passed social studies standards that incorporates massive chunks of Christianity and skepticism about the 2020 election into the social studies standards. So it's that trick of where if somebody says that what they're worried about is you indoctrinating, they're actually just admitting to the fact that they would like to be doing the indoctrinating themselves, which is kind of terrifying.
Sure, it's our turn now.
Right, yeah. Prager Universe. Anybody here from Prager? Oh, really? No, I'm surprised.
Back to your question, Ralph, about using history. I think that we really need to study fascism more and the ways in which propaganda and information are such key elements of the playbook of fascists. I was hearing a speaker yesterday talk about how maybe Christian nationalism has been used as this easier phrase for folks to say because fascism was something just in the past and it was Europe and it was all defeated in World War II. So I absolutely think that historical lens is vital. And I think these lessons could possibly be brought more to the forefront of some of our history and social studies classes, not just media literacy classes, because we're already talking about these things, but maybe not with such a lens on the information and the ways that the demagogue slash leader has leveraged those tools because they're even more powerful now than they ever have been before. And I think Harari talks about that in terms of when you have large scale information control, it just doesn't seem to go really well in a lot of, maybe most cases, a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I think, as I understand it, I haven't read the book either, but I skimmed it and I saw a section on social credit systems.
Yeah.
And I've been teaching about social credit systems for a few years. It's in my new textbook. And I feel like it's a safe way to talk about the ideological social control dimensions of technology, because mostly the case we're using is China.
And
Right.
talk about how we want maybe to contrast and not be China. So what would that look like here in the United States if we don't want to become this, crazy surveillance society that is not allowing for much in the way of expression and freedom and all this?
Renee, when you're writing about that, did you talk about Nosedive?
No, what is nosedive?
No, he actually discusses it in the book. Nosedive was the Black Mirror episode about social credit, right? Where she is trying, I don't know if have any of you seen this episode?
Yes, it's horrifying.
Can you,
Wait, her car breaks down, right? Is that the
yeah,
one where?
yeah. Can you summarize it? What happens in it? She gets obsessed with trying to increase her.
Yeah, so everybody's got a device in their hand, and it's like you have an interaction. Like it would be an example right now would be if somebody here would be to like a photo that somebody else has, and they get a couple coins, and then it starts having effects in the real world with somebody's like live credit rating in transactions. It's crazy.
Right. But the character in the episode keeps on doing things that accidentally actually make her score go down. Like she accidentally spills something on a person she's trying to be nice to because if she's interacting with them, that'll increase her score. But then she like dumps a drink on the person. So it actually ends up bringing her score down. So, and of course, he's talking about it partially as just how much how much these social credit systems are again a step toward this the idea of knowing everything that a person is doing and thinking, and that becoming a vector for control.
Now, listen, here's the thing. I think we should do a session. Wes has had to leave to go to class, but he's given us a couple of things to look at, including a Comedy Central extended interview with Harari. And I'm wondering about this idea of looking at how entertainment media has given us some things to be afraid of or things to be hopeful about. And so I'm thinking about what if we did a viewing and discussion of that Black Mirror episode, or maybe another entertainment media representation of AI. And anybody be up for kind of exploring the way entertainment media is kind of seeding some ideas about human agency? Because I would love to have a short list of media artifacts that were entertainment media that I could assign to my students. Mm-hmm. And that would allow us to talk about this representation reality thing. We get our understandings about AI, not just from using it, but from news and entertainment and persuasion that show us what to expect.
Mhm.
I
actually, yeah, I always think of, HAL 9000 as being, I mean, essentially what a lot of Harari's describing is HAL 9000 in terms of, you know, killing all the humans in order to complete the mission, basically, that kind of misalignment, which is so, in terms of like monster creation. And I think similar to Ex Machina, which Scott mentioned and Philip mentioned also. That is such a hard film to watch because of the misogyny that's part of the storyline. I think it's great, but it is just really painful to watch.
All right. So listen, everybody who came to this meeting is going to get an email from me saying, let's start a Google Doc. And we're going to spend a couple of months this summer watching TV, watching movies, looking for examples. And we're going to get a 10 or 15 or 20 of them on a Google Doc. And then later on in the summer, when we're sipping our iced tea out on the porch, we'll have another media club where we talk specifically about representations of AI in entertainment media. All right, listen, thank you so much for being part of the media club this week. You came from near, you came from far, but reducing loneliness and giving us time for reflection, it's good for you. It's good for you. Thanks for being part of it. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ralph, thank you so much for starting this topic. I'm counting on you and Scott are going to lead this next thing, right?
I got some thoughts. Yeah.
Yay!
I'm happy to help.
All right.
Hey, Renee,
Thank
I was
you. Take
late.
care.
Will I still get the email?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, Cameron. You're in.
Okay.
You're gonna
Yeah,
get
I
it.
had a meeting run late. I'm like, I'm missing the favorite part of my week.
And I'll send you the link to the thing you missed. It was a great discussion, honest to God. And the chat. Woo!
I know. I saved the chat and I have been listening to the last 15 minutes or so, but and I've already put the book on hold.
Nice.
So
So
at
your
my
summer,
library.
your summer with Harari is
ready.
Nicely set up.
Yes. I love y'all so much. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
We're
This was
really happy
really
you're
great.
here. Thanks a lot.
Renee, it's always so great to see you. Donna, it's
All
great to see
right.
you
Right back at you, my friend.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Take care.
Take care.
Wow,
Bye.
we had people from India, Brazil,
Brazil.
West Coast,
Thank
East
you
Coast.
so much, Renee.
Yeah,
Mwah,
thank you.
mwah. So happy you were here. Thank you so much. You made my day, my friend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.